I would like to introduce our distinguished moderator, Laysha Ward, President of the Community Relations and the Target Foundation, and if you would join me in a round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. Come on, more energy. Am I going to have to ask you to do some jumping jacks? You look scared. No. I do want to thank you all for gathering at the end of a day. It has been, I think, an inspiring day and one that has energized us all to continue this great work. So really appreciate you choosing to attend this session and choosing to be a part of this great conversation. And we think that you'll find it valuable. On behalf of everyone at Target, it really is a privilege to be a part of this summit. And before I begin, I want to thank Governor Jeb Bush and Patricia Levick and everyone at the Foundation for Excellence in Education for their partnership, their leadership, and their vision. As Governor Bush said this morning, leadership matters and it counts, and certainly he and others are exercising that leadership. And we really would like to also extend a warm welcome and thanks to our esteemed panelists who are here today and thank them for sharing their views and their expertise. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Wendy Spencer, who is here in the front row, who surprised me. She is the CEO of the Corporation for National and Community Service, where I serve on the board as her board chair, and we're also very focused on moving the needle in education and leveraging service as a solution in education. So Wendy, thank you for joining us and for the great work that you're helping us do all across the country and the work that you did in Florida, in fact, in your role as service commissioner prior to joining us in that role. Certainly the panelists are going to share where theory and practical application come together. And as you can see in their impressive bios in the program, they really do not just talk about the work, but put the work into action in local communities. I'd like to recognize my own team who is here. So often we do great work with and through others, but they don't always get the credit or recognition they deserve. And two leaders from my team who are here today, Reba Dominski and Andrea Nielsen, are a part of a larger gathering of leaders across the nation at Target who are deeply committed to this work and exercise leadership on a daily basis in communities around this country. And I'd like to recognize them for their leadership and actually ask them to stand so that you can see them. And they do a good job of trying to tell me what to do and what to say, and sometimes I break the rules, but for the most part, take their wise counsel. If you've not had a chance to meet them, I know many of you have, I would encourage you to do so because we are here to listen and learn and to take those insights back into the work that we do all across the country and indeed around the world. You know, all of you, again, are critical to this conversation and the work that lies ahead. And coming out of this recent election cycle where conversations were often very, very polarizing, this is really a time to unify the country around some of the nation's most pressing issues, like improving education. Today, too many students are not graduating from high school with the skills needed to succeed in college or secure entry-level jobs. In basic terms, college and career readiness includes two primary components: academic standards and graduation requirements. Academic standards are what students should know and be able to do by the time they graduate. The major effort with this is the Common Core state standards, and in fact, I know many of you likely attended the session here today talking about Common Core, which express the set of academic standards in core subjects such as English and math at key grade levels. Graduation requirements are the courses students must take in order to graduate from high school, and what is important in both of these efforts is that they're aligned with what colleges and what employers expect of graduates, what those expectations are. And if we're going to lower dropout rates, produce college-educated workers for the future, and narrow the achievement gap, it is imperative that a high school diploma truly means something, that it represents that a student is ready, truly ready for college and a career. The goal of this panel is to provide you with ideas for action that you can actually take back into your communities and specific strategies that will help you accelerate and improve the college and career readiness of students in your communities as well. And as you've heard oftentimes throughout today, we do want to keep student-driven achievement at the center of the work. Easier said than done. I'd like all of us to be open to rethinking the requirements for being college and career ready, and really think about how do you remove the barriers to accelerating the pace of student achievement? What are those barriers, and how do we put those aside? And we're looking for progress, not perfection. We talk about that a lot in our business context. We need to make progress, and we need to have courageous ideas that will move us forward. And for all the challenges we perceive as barriers to success, and certainly there are some, there are actually a lot of really exciting things happening in schools today. There truly are. We're really excited when we hear that there are students who are being provided with the support they need in high school to ensure that they can succeed in college, that we're enabling students to accelerate learning and move at their own pace. Customized learning is growing in the country, and opportunities that provide students to take college courses are on the rise as well. The challenge is that we need more of those solutions at scale, and for those to be delivered with a sense of urgency. So over the course of the next hour and 15 minutes, we're going to explore these topics and leave time to take a few of your questions. So regardless of your role, your sector, or location, I think that we can all agree that education in America needs help. The reality is that the US used to have the second highest graduation rate of high school students in the world, the second highest. Now we've dropped to 13. Recent data show that 1 in 4 American kids did not graduate from high school, and nearly 40% of African American and Hispanic students didn't earn a diploma either on time or at all. 40%. And the rates are even higher in some urban school districts, as many of us know. 1.3 million US children dropped out of the high school class of 2010. And according to an estimate from the Alliance for Excellent Education, led by former Governor Wise, if that trend continues over the next decade, we will lose 13 million students at a lifetime cost in lost wages of more than $3 trillion. The costs are staggering. US companies will face a shortage of qualified workers in the near future. According to a recent report from Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce, by 2018, which is not that far away, nearly 2/3 of new jobs will require some form of post-secondary education. The report says that without a dramatic change, the US is on track to fall short of these needs by a full 3 million workers. If the US cannot compete in education, we cannot compete at all. At Target, education is at the heart of our giving program. We believe that all kids deserve a quality education regardless of race or socioeconomic status. We believe that all kids can learn and that they should reach their full potential. Although there are many factors that contribute to improving student achievement in our education system, we have a significant focus on K-3 literacy. A study by the Annie E. Casey Foundation shows that a child who cannot read proficiently by the end of 3rd grade is 4 times more likely not to graduate. And reading is also foundational in learning science, math, and other subjects. We're on track to reach $1 billion in giving to education by the end of 2015, which is our single largest philanthropic commitment to date. We also provide thousands of volunteer and service hours in support of education as well. You know, Target is a part of communities all across the country, and we listen and learn and act locally, as I mentioned earlier, with an eye towards scalable solutions that work. We offer a range of innovative education programs and partnerships, such as Target School Library Makeovers. I hope that some of you have had a chance to attend one. If not, we would welcome your attendance at some across the country. But through this program, we've transformed libraries in Title I schools across the country into inspiring learning spaces with over 2,000 new books and technology packages, smart boards, iPads, parent resources. And every school also has the opportunity to receive a Target Meals for Minds school pantry, which provides students and their families access to a variety of food staples and fresh produce so that kids can focus on their studies instead of wondering where their next meal is going to come from. We are partnering to improve reading proficiency with organizations such as Experience Corps, Bell, the Minnesota Reading Corps, and the Children's Literacy Initiative, to name a few. We're also conducting reading pilots in Minneapolis, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. to bring personalized reading instruction to students based on the unique needs of each student and each district. In collaboration with these districts, we're implementing comprehensive sustainable literacy programs that use RTI literacy coaches to support teachers and access to new reading materials that align to the Common Core. We are partnering with the American Institute for Research, AIR, which is a wonderful resource for us to support a rigorous evaluation of our reading pilots and are measuring progress within our reading portfolio and partnerships to really understand the best ideas to improve reading proficiency and growth so that we can continue to fund those initiatives that are showing progress. We have a voice in the national dialogue on education. Target is a company with a big brand. We have over 360,000 team members around the US and around the world. And we also have millions of consumers, guests is what we call, all of you, I hope, who shop our stores on a weekly basis. And we have a vested stake in ensuring that we have the best education system in the world, the very best. And one of the unique strengths that we can bring to bear on this issue, and that we're often asked to bring to bear on this issue, is to help raise awareness. So often we hear from parents that they think their school is fine. It's that other school that's the problem. And they don't realize that it's not just schools in underserved communities, but the bar across the nation needs to be raised. And we're able to bring the message around the importance of education to millions of consumers. And last summer, for example, Target leveraged the visibility and capital of primetime Olympic TV coverage to air an education commercial so that we could raise awareness about the importance of getting more kids on the path to high school graduation so that they were ready for college, a career, and life. Our TV spot really celebrated that moment when a high school student finds out that they were accepted into college. Do you remember that moment? Some of you remember the moment? If mine was a long time ago, I'll admit, but I do still remember the moment and what that meant to my family. So I'd like to show you that spot, if I may.
Yes! Yes! I'm accepted! I'm going to college. It's official.
But then you opened up a door, you opened up a door, now I start to believe in something else. I took the faithful leap and hopped up all my things and all my love and gave it to somebody else. But how do I know if I make it through? How do I know where's the proof in you?
I didn't open it. It was like this. I haven't looked at it.
Congratulations on your approval as a commercial major with
We're really proud of that spot, and I was, moved again when I see it. Every time I see it, I think, I had that moment. We want all kids to have that moment. And those aren't actors. They're real kids, and they are our future. We were delighted to also produce the spot in Spanish so that we've been able to air it in both versions in a number of outlets. And we hope that it inspires students and parents and caring adults to really get involved in this issue and to realize that we have an opportunity to really restore the great education system in this country that has made us great and will continue to keep us great. We're in a position to make a difference, and we know at Target, obviously, when you think about private sector dollars, it's a small percent of the pie. But we do think we have leverage, and we want to bring our unique resources to bear to have collective impact along with all of you. But we have to come together across sectors with open minds, shared commitments, unique strengths, and accountability for results. Results matter, and so we need to ensure that we're really focused again on children and getting results for children, not results that make us happy. And it's going to take collaboration. I know we've said that a lot today, but it is true. Systemic policy changes that align with innovative programs, partnerships, and infrastructure Caring parents and adults are essential to our success, the secret sauce, as we often say at Target. Outstanding educators and leaders like all of you and today's panelists, who I am delighted that we're going to hear from now. With us today are David Abbott, Deputy Commissioner and General Counsel for the Rhode Island Department of Education. Give a wave. Thank you, David. Kelli Stargel, Florida State Senator. Kelli, thank you for joining us. Joe Pickens, President of St. John's River Community College. And Russell Armstrong, Policy Advisor in the Office of Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal. Welcome to all of you. Each panelist is going to share some opening remarks, and after that, I'll pose a follow-up question for each of them, and then upon completion of each of their comments and that first question, we'll open it up to all of you and take as many of your questions as time allows prior to our wrap-up. With that, I'm going to turn it over to David and ask him to make a few opening comments.
Thank you, Laysha. So we're here to talk about college and career readiness. And for those of you who went to the Common Core segment earlier, there was a question from the audience about, well, what is career readiness? And we're part of the PARC Consortium in Rhode Island, the Partnership for Assessing Readiness for College and Career. And I think it's pretty telling that PARC was pretty quickly able to get to their definition of college readiness and are still working on their definition of career readiness, even though we're 2 years into the development cycle. And generally, as an industry, we have a pretty well accepted definition of college readiness. In Rhode Island, we say that that is able to enter our open enrollment community college system without need for remediation. And that requires basically 10th grade level skills in composition, interpretation, and computation. But what about career readiness exiting our secondary system? It's almost become a catchphrase at the end of college and career readiness, but there really is not a generally accepted nationwide definition. Whether it is readiness for any career, a specific career, a career cluster, it's been an ongoing debate for about 20 years. What is emerging is a general consensus that all post-secondary education is some type of career readiness training, and that this old notion that there's education in one camp and training in the other is something that we really need to move away from. So I'm going to try to talk briefly and generally about a couple of the core concepts around college and career readiness and give you a little bit of the Rhode Island context as I go. So the first thing I'm going to speak to is access. And in Rhode Island, we have a very strong regulatory scheme. We have a Board of Regents that has lawmaking authority, which isn't unique, but it's you may not have that in your individual states. And so we have a nestled set of regulations, and there are two that I'm going to briefly touch on. One is our overarching, our basic education program regulation, which defines all of the requirements for a system that can be funded under state law. And one of the precepts of the BEP, or Basic Education Program, is that every LEA is required to provide access to rigorous, guaranteed, and viable curricula for all students. And so there's clearly a link between access and rigor, which I'm going to return to. We also have high school graduation requirements. We have something called PBGR, or proficiency-based graduation requirements in Rhode Island. There are 6 core content areas, so English language arts, math, science, social studies, as well as arts and technology. And in addition to that, a demonstration of applied learning skills as in, like a senior project or a portfolio, or a growing number of industry certificates in career and tech. So all students need access to a pathway that gets them to demonstrate those proficiency in those 6 areas, and we call those the multiple pathways. Their state law, again, requires that there be multiple pathways, but the one that is, not surprisingly, most clearly defined is the pre-college track. I mean, that's where most of our kids are going to go. But the truth is that not all of our students are going to go to college, and our workforce development needs probably don't dictate that either. And so just for a quick example, in Rhode Island, about a third of the emerging work will be baccalaureate and beyond. About a third will be jobs that are not really careers, they're not life-sustaining wages. We're certainly not going to go out of our way to prepare that workforce because we're talking about college and career, not job preparation. But about a third of our emerging jobs are going to require something more than high school, but something less than a bachelor's degree. And this is really where the conversation is centering in Rhode Island right now, because that's the career readiness piece that we're focused on. So we want to have multiple pathways through secondary school into post-secondary that provide really valid career paths, and not just for students that are going to be going on and getting a BA or BS as part of their career track. And these multiple pathways are not fully individualized. There need to be several that are industry cluster driven, but we say that they need to be supply side sensitive, but demand side driven. And so very much the career readiness aspect is completely tied up in economic and workforce development in your states. It's not separate and apart, and increasingly we believe that we need to be thinking in terms of economic development when we're talking about education reform. So I said that access is very closely tied to rigor, and we pursue this guarantee of access to rigor in two distinct ways. One is by doing course mapping, and we've recently mapped all of our secondary, including middle school courses in every school in the state, and map those against national standards. We also have teacher course student mapping, so we can track which kids are in which courses at which level of rigor with which teacher, and we can track that back into our state assessment. And that's really critical because the big dirty secret in Rhode Island, and probably a lot of your states, is that we have huge achievement gaps among students in schools. And those are racial, they're ethnic, they're by disability, non-disability, and by primary English language, non-primary English language. And unfortunately, even as we're able to generate growth in student achievement as a state, in fact, while we're doing that, our achievement gaps in many areas are actually getting wider. And so part of that problem is the lack of access. And we know that for students that score substantially below proficient in math at our high school state assessment, over half of those have not been exposed to geometry, which is a sizable part of the state assessment. So, before we even get to, the quality of instruction, if you just haven't been exposed to the content, you're not going to do very well. And unfortunately, when we look at our course taking patterns, especially through the lens of rigor, you really see some disturbing trends that, it's not just suburban, urban, it's white, non-white, it's just, non-disabled, disabled. And basically the kids who are most at risk have the least likelihood of being exposed to challenging, rigorous instruction. That's a problem. And we're not going to get at some of our really deeper intransigent issues in education until we address it and own up that there is actually a civil rights aspect to access to rigor. And that's not just in Rhode Island. So, how do we, so there's that course mapping piece. The second piece is what we call early college access. And there are actually 6 elements to that I'm just gonna blow through really quickly and emphasize one area because we've been doing a lot of work in that lately. So one of these tracks is is getting kids into more rigorous courses, especially honors courses. And by honors courses, we mean courses that allow students to accelerate past course requirements in college. So, you know, you may not be getting college credit in high school, but taking that course allows you to advance into, you know, 201 classes versus 101 classes. Also in that bucket is advanced placement, and here's an area where we've really been doing a lot lately. In part driven by a statute that was passed just this spring by our General Assembly that really calls out the state to develop more access to advanced placement. And it was really driven by the awareness around our achievement gaps and trying to get more access to rigorous instruction, especially in our urban districts. And in part because of that legislation, we were able to get a grant from the William R. Keenan Charitable Trust, and that allowed us to do 3 5-day trainings for AP teachers, as well as provide another 23 scholarships in other content areas. And so in just 1 year, we were able to improve our access to AP by 11% and our access to Hispanic students by 13%. And so one of our lowest performing high schools in the state, in fact, the first persistently lowest achieving school that we identified, which is in Central Falls High School, which you may have read about. That's the one where all the teachers got fired and got into a major, an interesting conflagration between Randy Weingarten, the president, and the secretary, poor little Central Falls. Yeah. But they didn't have any AP courses until this initiative, and now they have 2, and they had over 80% pass rates in both those courses. So, you know, it's not the kids' problem here, folks. So, sure. So that's one bucket. Quickly moving through the other. There's concurrent enrollment and dual enrollment. In college, dual enrollment is where you're continuing to go to high school and you're simultaneously actually taking a college course on a college campus. And then concurrent enrollment is something that we're really pushing, which is getting our higher ed institutions to train teachers who are high school teachers to become adjunct faculty so that they can offer courses in the high schools and kids are getting both high school and college credit. And my own daughter just went through that. She just graduated. She wasn't in that spot, but we did just have that moment several months ago. So concurrent enrollment is, we're really putting a lot of eggs in that basket, and that's not just our public institutions, that's our private institutions as well. So that's 3 virtual courses. We have new virtual education regulations that are pushing that. Middle college, I'm going to focus on that for a second. We have one charter school that is a middle college. It's a nursing academy, and it's part of, hopefully it is the precursor of a whole movement, what we call K-14, because a lot of these career paths, what they need are, if you're going through one of these multiple pathways through your high school, you need to have somewhere to keep going. And so a middle college around the nursing profession is just one great example of that. And then finally, career in tech. And when we talk about early access to college on the career side, this is really where we're falling down and where we need to focus, because we just don't have that K-14 system in place in Rhode Island, and so we don't have those career paths. You know, and so when we look at, you know, Laysha was talking about the dropout rates, which, you know, are scary, especially in our urban areas. You know, but for kids who really don't think college is for them, and it's either college, you know, if the message is it's either college or you might as well drop out because having a high school diploma doesn't do you much good in this economy, which is the message we're sending all the kids, which is not wrong. But, you know, how many of those kids would have stuck it out if they had a path to get on in high school, stay in high school, have the remediation embedded in real classes, not, you know, something you pay for over on the side, and actually get you a career credential in an emerging area where you have a very high likelihood of getting a job. And the answer to that is we don't know because we don't have that. And so there's a tremendous challenge on the career readiness side to develop the infrastructure. It requires partnerships across agencies, across institutions. For our view, it really requires a vertical articulation, so there's some accountability. You know, I think some of us are just on the K-12 side are so used to the idea of being held accountable that it's actually shocking when you talk to higher ed, and you know, the antipathy towards being held accountable is unbelievable. You know, that why would we be held accountable? And you know, why would our course offerings be driven by student need? It's a real issue nationwide, and this is, you know, I hopefully the Common Core conversation, and you know, David Coleman, you know, thank you for joining College Board. You know, he's really got the vision. We spoke with him yesterday, the Chiefs for Change, and he's really going to be driving the career readiness piece right through, you know, AP, which is a proprietary product. SAT is going to have more career and technical reading aspects to it, and he's really going to bring a whole lot of attention to bringing the college and career readiness to the conversation.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate your insights and perspective. I think in the interest of time, I'm actually going to move to our next speaker and come back with the follow-up question and ask that Senator Kelli Stargel share her insights and perspectives with us. Kelli, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And a lot of the things that were just discussed about Rhode Island, we are doing in the state of Florida as well. All of our high schools in the state of Florida have to offer either AP courses, Advanced International Certificate of Education or ACE courses, dual enrollment, digital learning. All of our students have access to those opportunities in high school. One of the things we've also done is that we have end-of-course exams for several of our required courses for graduation. We always are increasing standards, and currently you have to pass the algebra, then we implemented algebra to biology, geometry, and we're continuing to increase the standards, and when we also have the end-of-course exams that go along with that. We've now linked the end-of-course exam passage with the funding to the course. So if the student goes to the algebra course and they do not pass the end-of-course exam, then the school doesn't get the FTE for that student. That way everybody has a stake in making sure that that student is successful. We also have a rigorous career education program. All of our districts have to offer at least one high school that offers some sort of a career education program where they can get the career education certificates such as medical assistant, certified network professional assistant. We already had it at our high school level. This last year we passed a bill that pushed that actually down to the middle school level so that you can have weighted funding in our districts for students who are actually getting those career educations at the middle school level. One of the things that we did this last year, which was very exciting to me, I have 5 children in background, and all of my kids learned very differently. They have different strengths. They have different ways that they wanted to learn. We passed the Excel bill, which was the academically challenging curriculum to enhance learning. And what we did with that is we've allowed students now to actually be funded based on content mastering and learning the content rather than seat time. So you could have a student, I have one that was very smart and was able to figure out algebra pretty, I don't know, through osmosis. It didn't come from her parents. But she was actually very advanced, and she would have been able to have passed possibly an end-of-course exam very shortly after going into a course. We've passed legislation now that you can actually take the end-of-course exam. When you've passed the end-of-course exam, you get the funding for that course. You could possibly even have a student who never sat in that course, either a homeschooled student or a student who availed themselves to Khan Academy or something like that. There are kids out there who just have a desire to learn. We've now recognized that in some of our advanced students, and we're allowing them to have that opportunity to excel, and then also give an incentive to the district. If a student comes in, sits for the course, passes the end-of-course exam, then the district will get funding for that student, even though that student may never had seat time, recognizing that not all students take 180 days to complete a course. So we've done some things to have more of a customized one-type learning. We actually did that all the way down to elementary level. You may have a kid who's in 2nd grade who really could be learning on a 4th grade level. We are now availing themselves to being able to take digital learning classes through the Florida Virtual School, through other digital providers that we have in the state so that our students can excel. So we really have tried to tailor the instruction to our kids. We've done a lot through the last few years to focus on our low-performing kids. Now we're doing some things to focus on our high-achieving kids. We've heard throughout the conference on you hear frequently about the competition between the United States and other countries. I think we have the capability in this country with our advanced kids to be able to excel and surpass other countries, and if we just kind of take the reins off of them and let them go. So what we've done in Florida is tried to implement some of those policies so that we can take the reins off of our kids and let them go. Most of our kids, we have a couple programs where our kids can go to high school, they earn due enrollment credits. My son went to a program at collegiate high school, actually graduated high school with his AA degree, was able to go directly into college if he chose to do something like that. So we've done some things so our kids have an incentive among themselves, some own personal accountability and responsibility to be able to avail themselves of these opportunities to get into college and to be ready. We've also driven it with parent participation pieces in it to where if a student has met the criteria, if they've done well on our state assessment test, which is the FCAT of a 4 or 5, the parent is told about these options of acceleration, and the parent can then say, I want my child to participate in this program or participate in an opportunity of taking advanced classes. The principal at the school has to allow this child that opportunity. Same at the high school level. If a child has met the requirement to take the courses, they can go into the dual enrollment classes. There's no stopgap from the district to say, no, we don't want your child to participate in that. The parents actually have a say as well. So you can tailor the education around what's best for your child, and your child gets to have a stake in, if I work really hard and if I learn fast, I can excel at the level that I want to excel and not be tied to a class schedule of 180 days.
Perspective. Thank you, Senator Stargel. And I think I'm most impressed that she has 5 children. That is multitasking at its best, and getting 5 through the education system. We'll come back to that as a skill we want to share with this group in just a moment. So we're looking forward now to hearing from Joe Pickens. Joe?
Well, thank you. So it's the fall of 2007, and I find myself in New Orleans, Louisiana, at a SACS convention, not because I saw anything in particular on the agenda that I thought I should go see, but rather because my predecessor, Dr. McClendon, who was the president of St. John's River State College for 36 years prior to my becoming the president, wanted to go to New Orleans one more time before he left his presidency, New Orleans being his favorite town in the world. But it was very fortuitous for me. I came across, it was my last year in the Florida legislature, I had one session left before I was term limited out, and I came across a presentation that was being done by the El Paso Community College and El Paso Public School System, where they had decided as a community that they were going to do something about their very high remediation rates of their recent high school graduates themselves. My understanding is they did it without any funding or help from the Texas legislature or the State Board of Education. It was an issue that they recognized existed in their community and that they should be able to do something about. I was inspired by that, and it was the genesis of Senate Bill 1908 that I worked on with now Senate President Gates. And I said, you know, well, if I'm a state legislator in Florida, then maybe the community that needs to address this is the community of the state of Florida. And I was in a position to do something about that, chairing the Schools and Learning Council under Speaker, now Senator Marco Rubio. And so we put together this legislation package that started addressing the issue of remediation before students get to the college level. For decades before, in Florida, and I bet in your state too, students didn't even find out that they needed remediation until they got to college. In California, students use terms like shocked and surprised to find that they're not ready for college when they get to college. 67% of the high school graduates that went to college in the 09-10 graduating class in Florida, 67% that went to college went to a Florida college system, state or community college. Their aha moment was when they walked across the stage and got a high school diploma that made them eligible to go to college, or so they thought. The real problem was that the real aha moment for 67% of that 67% is when they got to college, took the PERT for the first time and found out they were not ready to do college work for college credit and were stuck in remedial classes in both reading or math or both. So in recognizing that, what we did was, Kelly already mentioned that our students take the FCAT in the 10th grade, and we identified those students that scored a 2, 3, or 4 in math on the FCAT, or a 2 or 3 in reading, and said, and they indicated that they were interested in going to college, so we didn't do it with all of them at first. One of the mistakes that I made that Senator Stargel cleaned up for me afterwards. And we said, well, you know, why don't we give them the CPT, then now it'd be the college placement test, AccuPlacer, in the 11th grade, and let's find out if they're interested in going to college, whether they're college ready. Well, 90-something% of those students that FCAT'd into taking the CPT were deficient in either reading or mathematics. Well, then it gave us the opportunity to do something about that. And so we partnered with school districts in creating bridge or transitional courses that were modeled specifically after the remedial classes that they would be taking once they got to me, if they didn't take them before, and gave them the opportunity to take those in their senior year and become college ready, or at least become more college ready than they would have been had they come to me shocked and surprised to learn for the first time that they weren't college ready. Now, number one, I already told you one mistake. The second mistake, learn from the naivety of Joe Pickens, who thought that if we made the awareness and created those classes and gave them the opportunity to take college remedial classes in the 12th grade for free, rather than wait and take them paying tuition for them at college, that they would take them. Well, they passed on that opportunity. And so the second thing then Representative Stargel did was come in and started testing all students and then made taking of the courses mandatory. And so we are a little further behind than we ought to be in determining how successful we have been, because I didn't make them take the class, and Representative Stargel had the sense to say, you're going to take the classes. And that's right. That's the 5 kids that, you know, she learned that I only have 3 and I didn't learn that. But we also realize in Florida that is really treating a symptom, you know, not the real problem. And we put a Band-Aid on the wound, but you know, you have to start somewhere. In the presentation that I do that's a PowerPoint, I show firefighters spraying water on the hottest part of the fire. Well, that's what we're doing in Florida right now, is we're trying to spray the fire out where it's the hottest and the worst. And that is that 67% of our graduates, they're coming to us that aren't college ready. In the interest of time, you were going to ask me, you know, how could we partner, or how do we partner with K-12 in order to make things better? And I would tell you 3 things, and then I'll be done. The first is to avoid the blame game. That was one of the most interesting things about human nature that I learned when we were going about this, is how quickly people wanted to point fingers. And so one of the slides I have in my PowerPoint is people pointing fingers at each other. It was real easy for the college system to point fingers at high schools and say, you know what? If you just did your job and sent us high school graduates who are ready to do college work, then our success rates would be much better. Well, it's awfully easy. My wife teaching middle school, for high schools to point fingers at the middle schools and say, you know what? If you just sent us 9th graders ready to do 9th grade work in the 9th grade, then our graduation rates would be much better and our success rates would be great. Well, you can follow that domino, and the middle schools can point fingers at elementary schools and say, you're not sending me 6th graders in Florida ready to be 6th graders. And we're behind the 8 ball from the very beginning. And of course, the elementary schools can point fingers at parents or the lack thereof and society. And now what? You have pointed fingers all the way from the Florida college system to the crib, and you've accomplished absolutely nothing but getting it out of your system. So I would suggest to you, legislators, get that out of your system and then talk about how can we resolve this issue, because it is our problem as opposed to allocating blame. 2 movies that you should watch to make this point. You're going to be pretty surprised at what these movies are. The first one is Fast Times at Ridgemont High, where, for those of you that are old enough, will remember one of my heroes, Jeff Spicoli. Well, how could you learn something from Jeff Spicoli about higher education in K-12? It's the scene where he brings the pizza into Mr. Hand's class, and Mr. Hand goes crazy because he is occupying his time by bringing a pizza into class. And Jeff Spicoli says, I've been thinking about that, Mr. Hand, but if you're here and I'm here and they're here, well, then isn't it our time? Well, for decades, we thought that they were their students and then they were my students. And that's what we did. And we were in silos, and we took whatever students we got from them to me. What we needed to do in Florida and what I'm trying to do in my service area is create an atmosphere where they're our students, and they're our students from the very beginning, and they're our students at least in middle school in order to help become more college ready. The second movie is Cool Hand Luke, where you can see Strother Martin at the top of the stairs staring down at Paul Newman on the ground, and what does he say? What we've got here is the failure to communicate. And it really comes down to that simple between the college system and K-12. There's such little communication between us because we're all doing our own things that we've created this monster of students not knowing that they're college ready and us saying we're the ones that have to deal with the problem. So I will leave you with this, and it's the last slide that I did bring from my PowerPoint. And I believe this as a college president. The single most important thing that I can do as a college president and the college can do as an institution in our community is to partner with K-12 to create awareness and recognition of what college ready means vis-a-vis a high school diploma, and work to make change without pointing blame. If you just start communicating between K-12 and open access institutions, just that will create an awareness that will make students know that they need to do a little bit more than the minimum necessary to get out of there to be successful when they get in here, and you've gone a long way towards starting to solve the problem.
Thank you, Joe. Your passion around this work is contagious, and I certainly enjoy a speaker that can bring all the seminal points down to 2 movies. So that is also something that we'll come back to. Now let's hear from Russell Armstrong, and then we'll open it up for questions from all of you. Russell?
Well, I guess we're done now since the rest of the panelists have said everything that there is to say about college and career readiness. I don't know how to follow up on that, but actually to pick up on the point that was just made, awareness is definitely key in terms of making sure that students have the right tools and the right options to be ready for college and career ready. But I think access is also critical, as well as presenting them with options. I think we have a diverse student body that needs to have options that are flexible and that relate to their lives. Going back to what was said earlier, we as a country and we as states, we've been behind on college and career readiness for decades. And it's not necessarily the fact that we haven't done anything or that there's something magical that other countries have done. It's that while we've stayed stagnant, they've been moving forward doing the things that we had done for generations beforehand. And so now it's critical that we actually push the button forward and make sure that we do all the options and we do things that are possible for us. Now, us in Louisiana, I mean, we're not necessarily, we're not going to compare to Finland on any test like that. However, I do like to say that we have done plenty in terms of doing everything at once so that we can push the bar forward. We've implemented career and diploma tracks. We've implemented ACT and made it mandatory for our 11th graders to take so that they have that option and making sure that's funded for them. We've done things such as create 9th grade academies to help bridge that gap between middle school and high school. We've had institutions where we've done our industry-based credits. So if a student decides that they need to be college and career ready, that if they want to jump off at one point and then jump back on, there are natural break points for them. Because in reality, as cost of college rises, students don't just decide that they want to go into a career or to college. A lot of times, students have to do both just so they can pay for college. They need to figure out ways that they can figure out how are they going to be able to fund this while in high school and be able to plan for their future, and how can that future be flexible? We need to have options for them in terms of 2-year schools and 4-year schools, whether it's through early enrollment or through early graduation incentives, or a number of other ideas and ways that we can make sure that they are getting through in time or before time. And I think as we move away from the idea of education being tied to time and instead being tied to progress, we're going to have students accelerate their education, and we're going to see increased rates. Now, by doing all these things at once in Louisiana, again, we've seen increases across the board. We've had our ACT scores have stayed pat and grown over time. We've increased our graduation rates from 65% over the last 4 years to over 70% now. We've had our dropout rate drop by 30 percentage points over the last 6 to 7 years. We've had our students have done better, but there's always more that we can do. And so I think that we need to think collectively and also individually about what are those things that we can do to match up with the needs of our students across the board.
Thank you very much, Russell. And I'll ask those of you who have questions to begin to move to the center and present those questions. And I'll begin, actually, Russell, with you. Around the graduation incentives that were created in Louisiana, can you speak a bit about those incentives and how challenging they were to present, implement, barriers to those being accepted?
Sure. And I'd like to say that if you came to the presentation earlier, we've had both our current state superintendent and our former state superintendent, John White and Paul Pasterick, were here earlier on. And a lot of the progress that we've made in terms of college and career readiness are tied to the hard efforts of both of those individuals. Paul made it a priority for the department, which I used to work for before moving to the governor's office, to look at early graduation in terms of dual enrollment and providing options for students. We created scholarships so that students could enroll through early start, so that students could enroll in college classes early on, the same way that AP courses count for them in terms of college credit. Recently, what we've done in this past session is that we added a early graduation high school scholarship, which is to start next year. That scholarship is basically, and we're not the first state to do this, will create an incentive for students to get through high school faster. So a lot of states have started the 3-year diplomas. Well, we didn't want to necessarily tie it to 3 years, but we instead said that if a student graduates early, and there's just one more tool in our toolkit to have, is that if a student graduates early, then they'll receive half of the funding that normally would have been allocated to them to go to use for college. And we think that's something that would incentivize students and help alleviate the burden of the rising cost of college on them. If a student, and we're not going to just tie it to 11th grade, we also said that if a student graduates early in their senior year, then they'd also be able to use a portion of that funding again to actually attend college, the college of their choice across Louisiana. And so that has twofold. One, it gives them the options and the ability to not be constrained by funding, which a lot of our students are. When I was a high school teacher, many of my students were afraid to go to schools, especially out of state, or especially to the higher end schools, because they feared they couldn't afford it. So we wanted to make sure that access would be, by removing that sort of barrier of funding, that we created increased access and increased options. Now, it's not to say that there weren't barriers to that, because we had a lot of our institutions said that they felt that it was unnecessary, either because we already had dual enrollment, which gives them the ability to go and take college courses while they're in the safety net of high school, and also because there's a general push that people feel that students in high school aren't necessarily ready to go to college just yet. There's pushback on the idea of tying education to time, and so they feel that because it's a social process that they need to stay there for, stay in middle school for 3 years, stay in high school for 4 years, go to the 4-year college, then go to grad school, and maintain that same factory process that we've had for generation after generation. And we're trying to use all these incentives to get away from that, because we have so many students who have flexible options and flexible lives, and we need to start responding to that if we're going to have a 21st century education system.
Thank you, Russell. Want to add on to that before we take, then we'll take our next question from the audience.
Some of the Excel things that we've done in Florida as well are similar to that, but one of the things, a little bit of a different spin on the early graduation, what we've done in Florida, we found that a lot of the stopgap for wanting to have the kids excel and graduate early were the districts who didn't want to lose the funding. So what we've done in Florida is if the student graduates early, the school district still gets the funding for the rest of the year. So they didn't have an incentive to hold the child back so that they could have funding for the whole year.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Our first question, could you please give us your name and who you're with, and
Thank you. I'm
state your question.
Jerry Sonnenberg, State Representative from Colorado. And you talked about some of the remediation and then also utilizing high school teachers to teach college classes and AP classes. What do you do different to train those teachers where you're getting that college education and the ability to teach those high school students that we're not getting when we have to send them to remediation? What's different there?
Never thought of it that way. So the slightly different answers for AP, which is purely a K-12 system. And so the AP courses and the access to the tests, as I mentioned, it's a proprietary product of the College Board. And they actually have expectations for the curriculum itself, which is regimented but not ironclad. And so there's quite a bit of flexibility actually in terms of what does it mean to be qualified to teach an AP course. It's not rigid. And likewise, in terms of concurrent enrollment, it really is, we see quite a variance institution to institution because it's the higher ed institution that's actually granting adjunct status to those teachers. And different institutions within Rhode Island have approached it slightly differently. And so the good news here is there's no hard and fast, only one way to do it. You know, if there's an interest and a commitment on the part of a school district to increase its AP offerings, and or if there's interest on the higher ed side to do some kind of concurrent enrollment, you're not all boxed in. You know, you can be pretty flexible. But we'd be happy to share information about how different institutions do those in Rhode Island. We'd be happy to share that with you.
Joe, would you like to comment?
We're pretty much the same in Florida. As he pointed out, an AP course is a high school class for high school credit for which someone might also be able to get college credit. A dual enrollment class is a college class for college credit that also qualifies in most instances for high school credit. So SACS our accrediting agency, considers those professors to be ours, and they're subject to the same credentialing as all of our other faculty are as it relates to the master's degree in field, or at least a certain number of post-bachelor's degree courses in field. The remedial courses, or the transitional courses that are taught in the 12th grade, are high school courses for high school credit for which no college credit is received, just the same as you're taking a remedial course at the college level. You are paying tuition, but you're getting no credit for it. So that's the structure that we have in Florida, and the professor's qualifications are different depending on whether it's actually a college course for college credit or something else.
Okay, next question, please.
Can I follow up on that?
Actually, in the interest of time, I would really love to ensure that the person behind you has an opportunity, and I believe our panelists would be willing to stand up here for a few moments at the end of the session and take incremental questions or comments from you. Please state your name and your question.
Sure. My name is Steve Cookson, and I'm Chairman of Education in the state legislature in Missouri, in the House of Representatives. I'm a retired superintendent of schools and served as chairman of the board at our community college. So I've had a lot of experience in the past. We've implemented what we call a dual diploma, where students are able to graduate at the same time with their high school diploma and their Associate of Arts diploma, and different variances along that pathway. And how do you folks view the use of with the explosion of online learning and virtual digital coursework done at a lot of higher education and community college? Even University of Missouri has online courses. How do you view that in helping to integrate that down into the K-12, or especially the upper level courses in K-12? Go ahead.
Well, I think it's critical that we focus on digital learning and digital classes as well as online, as well as traditional learning. One of the things that we've done in Louisiana is that we have a course provider piece. And so that allows, whether it's industries or virtual firms or even our colleges, our university systems have applied for this, to provide courses to all of our high school students who, again, using their student allocation for that, so that they can access courses, especially say in rural areas where they may not have access to certain foreign language classes or other certain advanced placement classes, so they can get access to those kind of courses using their own funding, so it's no additional cost to the student. So I think colleges are starting to see the need for this, both in K-12 and to provide to their own students who are already enrolled in their courses. I mean, as we shift to universities seeing the need to become more efficient, they're all feeling that they feel the pinch of budgets across state houses across the country. And so they feel the need that they need to move into providing better education, cheaper, faster, better, whether it's through online learning or through some other device as well. And I think it's also helps them as they tried to solve the problem of a vast array of students who are just simply not prepared for college when they graduate high school in terms of serving them through remedial education without it taxing the resources of their other professors at their school.
Thank you, and go ahead if you.
Just briefly, I think the challenge for us is really a lack of infrastructure. So the digital learning explosion is happening out there, but someone has to award the credits, and there has to be an infrastructure for doing that. And you know, Rhode Island is not where Florida is in terms of, and of course, assessments. And you know, we don't have an easy way for a district to award that credit if it's not coming from the higher ed institution. And so, you know, we're still in the infancy of you know, distance learning and virtual learning, but unless it's embedded in a blended learning school, or we've got a couple of those as charter schools, we really don't have an easy enough way for districts to recognize the learning that's going on and make sure that kids aren't getting kind of cheated out of credits that they could be earning. So that's our challenge, and I think probably in other states as well.
Thank you. I believe we have time for just one additional question. Would anyone else from the audience like to ask a question? If not, I'd actually like to give the panelists an opportunity to provide one closing comment or thought, takeaway for all of us before I wrap up. David, let's begin with you.
I think the challenge for us is kind of a mix of bringing that workforce development concept to the educational challenge, and because I think that's the critical component to bridging the gap between the K-12 system and the post-secondary system. We really need more of a seamless transition so that kids have an opportunity for a K-14 experience, because we're really just dropping the ball for a third of our kids that could be getting prepared for meaningful careers when college is just out of reach for them.
Thank you. Senator Stargel?
One of the things that I'm excited about that we are doing, and that I think is a movement across the nation that's important, is getting away from the notion that you have to sit in a certain space at a certain time for a certain length of time for mastery. And that way you can have the opportunity for kids who can excel to move on, but a kid who's not getting it quite as quickly can also stay back and make sure they master the content before moving on, and to have that flexibility. And what we have in digital technology with our iPads is to have different people working on different things in the same place and at the same time. And I can envision maybe in the future having two different types of educators, maybe an educator that's the one who imparts the knowledge, who's the expert on the subject matter, and then another educator who helps to facilitate making sure the student gets that knowledge and kind of guides them through that process. And I think once you can have that tailorized learning education experience, you're going to see kids at all various different levels, but having a mastery of what they've accomplished and knowing the content, and then being college ready when they're ready to get there, as opposed to a certain time restraint.
Thank you. Joe?
Two things. One's practical and one's really psychological. The first is Dr. Sandy Shugart's the president of Valencia College, who won the Aspen Award, the first one, so by some measures recognized as the finest community college in the country. In a presentation to our State Board of Education, and actually John Padgett's in the front row, and I think John may be the one that asked the question, Dr. Shugart said that as it relates to actually remediating students, where they actually become eligible to take college classes for college credit, the single most significant factor in their success, now this is the #1 community college by some standards in the country, the single most important factor is how much remediation do they need? Well, that is telling about the job we do as remediators if the most important factor is how much do they need, not what are we doing. And so I think we could look at how we could do it better. The second one is psychological and financial. A student that is taking a course in the 12th grade, if you legislators create that option for them, they're taking college prep courses because they intend to go to college, and they're acting like they mean it in the 12th grade by recognizing it, and they're doing it for free. Now imagine the difference in the mindset of, I'm in college prep classes because I'm going to college and I'm taking these classes and not paying tuition, as opposed to the mindset of, I'm now at college and I'm sitting in classes that I don't get credit for, that I am paying tuition for, that I am consuming precious Pell Grant money for because I'm in remediation. Well, I would suggest that if you're in the state legislature, one of the things you could do is to create a whole lot more students that are in college prep courses in the 12th grade rather than remediation in the 13th.
Thank you. Russell?
Well, I'd just like to take the time to point out that State Senator Appel is here, who is the point person for us on all of our education reform, and we're happy to have him here. One thing to note, Jim Shelton, who is here as well, he always says that in 10 years from now, education is going to look completely different than what it looks like today. Like, there's going to be a revolution where we have online learning, we're going to have digital learning, and we're going to have those lines and those barriers that exist today are going to dissolve. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm telling you, it's going to happen faster than you think. And I'd hope that any of the institutions today start to look and become forward-moving about that in terms of thinking how funding works, how students learn, and getting away from these barriers to education, these lines that we have of distinction between K through 12 and higher ed, between post-secondary and high school. And instead of thinking of someone being college and career ready, just making sure that they're ready for whatever life's challenges are for them, and that we measure progress, and that's how we measure progress, instead of measuring over time. And then when we get to that point, I think then we'll finally succeed at really pushing the needle forward in this country and across the world for education.
Let's give our panelists a warm round of applause. Amazing. Really thoughtful perspective. We gained tremendous insights from each of your experiences. David's insights on the catalyst for new AP legislation, Senator Stargel's practical and real example of how Florida ties its performance funding model to college and career readiness, and all of our panelists talked a lot about customization of learning and really thinking about how we can customize the pace of learning based on individual student needs, which is exciting to hear about. Joe had great perspective on how higher ed and K-12 can work together more effectively to ensure that students can successfully transition into high school and college. Talked a lot about the importance of college prep versus remediation, which I think is quite important. And of course, Russell focused on some new incentives that they have in place and closed, I think, very effectively by discussing this merger between digital learning and the physical traditional learning space. And given the work that we do in retail, we are going through a very similar kind of convergence between the digital shopping experience and the brick and mortar experience. And so this notion of technology changing, influencing our lives cuts across all sectors, and so that certainly is a prevalent point, as is customization, quite frankly. So we are honored to have had what I think is a really civil discourse. Again, as we think about this post-election season, it is possible to talk about very difficult issues where perhaps disparate points of view can be presented, but it can be done in a robust, healthy debate that leads to common ground, that leads us to a better place, leads the children who we represent to a better place as well. So I want to commend our panelists and all of you for opening up and being a part of this conversation. You know, it's my hope that we reflect on why we're here. That was raised earlier today. We get stuck talking about the policy and the legislation, all very, very important, in the programs, but many of us don't always know and or meet the children whose lives are impacted by our work. And so I do want us to think as we close out this day and get ready for this evening's conversation about why we're here, who we're representing. And we're representing kids of all backgrounds, including those from underserved communities or those who are doing advanced work, but as the Senator mentioned, could be doing even more if they choose and are given those opportunities. And kids can learn, all kids can learn. And so I'm here to tell you that on behalf of those kids who you may never see and or meet, thank you. It is very important work. I'm one of those kids who came from an underserved community. I attended Head Start as a child. I'm the first in my family to graduate from college and go on and work in a corporate setting. And you're making a difference. Certainly, individuals like you made a difference in the lives of children like me some 25 plus years ago. I'll be 45 soon. And if we continue to exercise our collective muscle and will, we'll make a difference in the lives of the next generation of leaders. And so I know this work is difficult, sometimes it's frustrating, but ultimately it's the most rewarding thing I think that we can all do, and a legacy moment, quite frankly, to ensure that we're doing something that benefits a generation of people that, perhaps we won't meet or put faces or names to, but who will be grateful and ensure that this nation remains strong. Take what you've learned back to your communities, leverage the conversation, turn it into action. We don't want to keep coming to these conferences and just talking about stuff. We need to go back in our communities and make things happen in a way that truly does move the needle. So on behalf of everyone at Target, and certainly on behalf of the Foundation for Excellence in Education, thank you for your participation today and tomorrow and in the weeks and months to come. Thank you.